Welcome in, everybody, ready for another deep dive. Today we're focusing on one of Earth's most elusive creatures, the cross-river gorilla. You might know about gorillas in general, but this subspecies, well, it's really something special. Critically endangered, less than 300 left in the wild. We've got research articles, field notes from those primatologists out in the field, even some local community reports.
Wow, sounds like we're going deep.
Yeah, our mission, to uncover what makes this gorilla so unique and, of course, what's being done to save it from extinction. So, first things first. What makes the Cross River gorilla stand out from, let's say, those mountain gorillas we always see pictures of?
The key difference is really their habitat.
Okay, tell me more.
Cross-river gorillas, they live in these incredibly dense mountainous forests
Oh, wow.
right along that Nigeria-Cameroon border. We're
Mhm.
talking serious elevations, 1,500 to 3,500 feet.
That's some tough terrain.
It's incredibly difficult to even navigate, let alone, for the gorillas to live in. And that isolation, that's played a huge role in how they've evolved, how they behave.
Okay, so I'm picturing them as like the ultimate mountain climbing gorillas now. Does living in that kind of environment make them physically different from other gorilla types?
Oh, they are a bit smaller than their western lowland cousins. Slightly smaller skull, a more compact build overall.
Interesting.
But don't get me wrong, males still get huge, around 440 pounds.
Wow.
Females are about half that size, so around 220 pounds.
Okay, so still pretty big.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But honestly, the real difference is in their social structure. They live in much, much smaller groups,
Really?
often just 4 to 8 individuals. Compare that to other gorillas, where you might see groups of dozens.
That is a big difference. You'd think living in those smaller, fragmented groups would make them even more, I don't know, vulnerable.
You're absolutely right, it does. It restricts their genetic diversity, meaning they're way more susceptible to diseases, any environmental changes.
It's a delicate balance then.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Even subtle shifts in their environment can have massive consequences.
So each small group is kind of like its own little, island, genetically speaking.
Exactly. And that isolation, well, it makes breeding even tougher. A major concern for researchers who are trying to ensure the species survives long term.
Makes sense. And I can only imagine how hard it is to actually study them. Trying to track these tiny groups through those dense forests, that must be a researcher's nightmare.
Oh, it's a challenge for sure. But researchers have still managed to learn some incredible things about their behavior.
Oh, like what?
Well, one thing totally unique to cross-river gorillas is their use of very specific vocalizations to communicate within their groups.
So they're not just like grunting randomly, there's actual meaning behind the sounds.
Exactly. For example, they've been observed using this particular kind of hoot, almost bird-like, to tell others where, say, a favorite fruit tree is.
That's incredible. Their communication is really complex then. But as fascinating as their behavior is, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the threats they're facing.
You're right, the cross-river gorilla is critically endangered. They're facing multiple threats all at the same time. It's tough.
Paint a picture for me.
Imagine you're this gorilla, right? You're trying to navigate a forest that keeps shrinking, constantly on edge because of poachers and snares, and on top of that, your food sources are becoming less and less reliable. It's pretty bleak.
Okay, let's break down those threats one by one. Let's start with habitat loss. Human encroachment has to be a huge issue, especially with their already limited fragmented habitat.
The habitat loss is definitely the most urgent threat.
Yeah.
And it's not just about how much forest is disappearing, but how that loss is chopping up their territory into even smaller pieces. Imagine a blanket being cut into smaller and smaller pieces.
Yeah.
That's what's happening to their home. And it's all driven by, well, so many things. Agriculture expanding, logging, new roads, cutting through their territory. So you're not only reducing the overall space they have, but you're also pushing these already small groups into even tighter spaces.
Right.
This means more competition for resources. And it's even harder for them to connect with other groups for breeding.
It's like they're being squeezed from all sides. And then you mentioned snares earlier. They're a silent killer in so many forests.
You said it. Snares are a massive problem. Often they're set for other animals, antelopes, bush pigs.
Right.
But gorillas can easily get caught in them, injured, sometimes fatally. And those injuries, they can be horrific, leading to these slow, painful deaths. It's one of the hardest threats to tackle because snares are often just left out there, indiscriminate, and super difficult to find.
It's just heartbreaking. And then there's the poaching. I know hunting for bushmeat is still an issue in some parts of Africa.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
While many local communities have strong beliefs against hunting gorillas, there are still cases of poaching for bushmeat.
And what drives that?
It's often driven by poverty, a lack of other food sources, sometimes even the demand for traditional medicine. It's a complicated issue with deep socioeconomic roots.
So it's not as easy as just enforcing laws. You have to address those underlying reasons why people are doing this. What about retaliatory killings? Are gorillas being targeted by farmers trying to protect their crops?
Well, gorillas are mainly herbivores, but they can raid crops if their natural food is scarce, which happens more and more as their habitat shrinks. So yes, this can lead to farmers killing gorillas to protect their livelihoods.
It's a conflict fueled by human need, but also the gorillas just trying to survive.
Exactly. It's a tough situation. And then you add climate change on top of that. It
Wow.
just throws another layer of uncertainty into their already fragile existence.
Right, because even small temperature or rainfall changes can affect the trees, and those are their food source.
Absolutely. Climate change messes with the delicate balance of the rainforest ecosystem, making their food supply even less reliable. And the scary part is, this is only going to get worse in the years to come.
It really drives home the point that the threats to cross-river gorillas aren't just isolated incidents, they're all connected and part of this much bigger global problem.
You got it. Their fate is completely tied to the health of our planet and the choices we make as a global community.
It's a lot to take in. But before we get too lost in the doom and gloom, I want to switch gears a bit and talk about the positives, the incredible work being done to protect these gorillas.
Oh, there are some truly inspiring conservation efforts happening right now. Gives
Right.
us real reason to be optimistic.
Well, I'm definitely eager to hear about those, but let's save that for part 2 of our deep dive. For now, let's just absorb everything we've learned so far, the unique challenges these gorillas face, how remarkably they've adapted to such a harsh environment, and of course, just how urgently we need to act. Okay, so we've definitely laid out some serious threats that the cross-river gorilla is up against. But now let's shift gears and talk about the solutions, the people working hard to turn things around. What are some of the most effective strategies out there?
Well, you can't talk about conservation without talking about protected areas.
Makes sense.
Parks like the Cross River National Park in Nigeria or the Takamanda National Park in Cameroon, those are absolutely crucial.
Right, because you can't protect a species if you don't protect its home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These parks, they offer safe havens for the gorillas, shielding them from that habitat loss, the poaching we talked about.
I get that. But just designating an area as a park, that doesn't solve everything, does it?
Of course not.
I mean, especially in such remote and tough terrain, enforcement and management have got to be huge hurdles.
You're absolutely right. It's way more than just drawing lines on a map. One of the biggest things is managing that interface between the park and the communities living nearby.
I see what you mean.
People need to survive, they need their livelihoods, and sometimes that clashes with conservation goals.
So it's about finding a way for people and gorillas to coexist. Are there any cases where this is actually working? Where communities are actively involved in conservation efforts?
Oh, there's some amazing examples. One that comes to mind is the work by the Wildlife Conservation Society over in the Embe Mountains of Nigeria. They've been partnering with local communities to create these community forests.
Oh, interesting.
Within these forests, they can do sustainable logging, harvesting of other forest products. It gives them alternative sources of income, and at the same time, it lessens the pressure on the gorilla habitat.
So it's about empowering those communities to become like guardians of their own natural resources.
Exactly. And it's not just about managing resources sustainably either. In some places, community members are being trained as eco-guards. So they're out there patrolling the forest, keeping an eye on gorilla activity, even helping to enforce those anti-poaching laws.
Wow, that's fantastic.
They're like the boots on the ground, and they know the local environment better than anyone.
Sounds like a win-win to me. Jobs for the community and better protection for the gorillas.
Couldn't agree more. It's a great model for how to do community-based conservation. And it's not limited to just Nigeria. Similar programs are popping up in Cameroon with some real success.
That's so encouraging to hear, but I imagine funding for these kinds of projects is always a struggle.
Funding is definitely a constant battle in conservation, especially for a species as rare and localized as the cross-river gorilla.
I can imagine.
You need a lot of investment for the research, the monitoring, the community engagement, not to mention those anti-poaching efforts.
So it's a pretty costly undertaking. Are there any creative ways that conservationists are finding that funding?
Well, one way is to partner up with bigger international organizations.
Yeah.
like the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF, or the African Wildlife Foundation, AWF.
Right, those big players.
They've got a global reach, so they can use their networks to raise awareness, secure funding for these crucial projects.
So pooling resources and expertise is key. But are there any examples of funding coming from, well, more unusual places?
Definitely. Ecotourism is becoming a bigger and bigger thing, and that can directly benefit gorilla conservation. For example, some organizations are offering these carefully managed gorilla trekking experiences, kind of like what's being done with mountain gorillas in Rwanda and Uganda.
Oh, I've heard about that.
The money that comes in from those tours, it goes straight back into conservation work. So it creates this sustainable funding stream.
So basically, tourism is funding conservation, which then makes the area even more attractive to tourists. A nice loop.
It's a great example of how conservation can actually be economically viable, benefiting both the gorillas and the communities around them.
I like it. Now, speaking of tourism, I can't imagine cross-river gorilla trekking being easy. I mean, these are super elusive animals living in incredibly challenging terrain.
Oh, it's definitely not a walk in the park, literally.
Yeah.
The terrain is rugged, forests are dense, and the gorillas themselves, they're incredibly shy.
So what's the draw then?
Well, that's part of the appeal, right? It's
Yeah.
a truly unique, immersive experience, and that chance to see these magnificent creatures in their natural habitat, that's something special.
So it's about the quality of the experience, not the quantity of people. A few lucky visitors who get to have this truly impactful experience, and at the same time, they're contributing to conservation.
Exactly. And it's not just about funding anti-poaching or habitat restoration. The money also goes into community development, healthcare, even education programs. It's about improving the lives of the whole community while making sure the gorillas have a future.
So it's a holistic approach, recognizing that conservation and human well-being are tied together.
Precisely. And this holistic approach, it has to go beyond just the local communities. There's this growing understanding that Nigeria and Cameroon need to work together.
That makes sense given that the gorillas don't really care about those political boundaries.
Exactly. Gorillas don't have passports. They move freely across these landscapes.
So how are these two countries collaborating? Are they making sure that conservation efforts are coordinated and effective across the border?
There have been some good steps forward recently. Organizations like WWF, they're helping to get those government agencies, conservation groups, and local communities from both sides talking to each other.
Okay, that's good.
They're trying to get everyone on the same page with conservation strategies, sharing data and research, even coordinating anti-poaching patrols so there are no gaps in protection.
Sounds like it's a work in progress, but at least there's recognition that this needs to be a joint effort. Now, I'm curious about the role of technology in all of this. We've talked about camera traps and monitoring, but are there other cool tools being used to protect the cross-river gorilla?
Oh, technology is playing a bigger role all the time, and it's exciting to see how it's being used in such innovative ways.
Oh, give me some examples.
For example, researchers are using drones now, equipped with high-resolution cameras, to survey huge areas of forest really quickly.
So it's like having an eye in the sky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gives you this broad perspective of the whole landscape.
Yeah, get it.
And it's not just about the visuals either. Some drones have sensors that can pick up on things like changes in vegetation, even the sound of gunshots, which can alert rangers to possible poaching activity as it's happening.
Wow, so they've got a high-tech guardian angel watching over them.
It's pretty amazing. And there's even more advanced stuff on the horizon, like artificial intelligence being used to analyze all that footage from camera traps.
AI for gorillas.
Yep. AI can identify individual gorillas based on their unique facial features, their markings. This helps researchers track their movements, figure out population sizes, even understand the social dynamics within groups.
So AI is helping us unravel the mysteries of these elusive creatures. That's incredible.
It really is. It's opening up so many possibilities for conservation research.
Now, how about for the local communities? We talked about eco-guards earlier, but are there other ways technology is being used to directly help those folks on the front lines?
There's this really cool trend with mobile apps that allow community members to report any illegal activity they see.
Oh, interesting.
They can share information about gorilla sightings, even get paid for their conservation efforts.
So it's like crowdsourcing conservation. Everyone has a way to participate.
Exactly. It gives those communities a platform to actively participate in conservation, and that's incredibly empowering.
It sounds like technology